Dhaka, the chaotic capital of Bangladesh, is one of the poorest cities in the world. A place where labour is dirt cheap and rules are loose. 75% of all export income comes from making clothes for rich countries. International retailers, including some of Australia's biggest names, have flooded in over the last decade to take advantage of the lowest paid workers in the world. Mukta worked in a garment factory. Not making clothes, she was a safety compliance officer in the doomed Rana Plaza. She was on the 5th floor of the building talking to two of her friends when it collapsed.
দুটো নার্স ছিল ওখানে, একজন হিন্দু আর একজন মুসলিম। হিন্দু মেয়েটা বলল দিদি কি যেন পড়ে যাচ্ছে। আমি তাকাতে মনে হয় 10 সেকেন্ডও হবে না, একদম ফ্ল্যাট হয়ে গেল ওগুলো পড়ে একটার সাথে একটা লেগে। যেরকম লিফট থেকে মানুষ নামে সেরকম মনে হলো আর কি, তখনকার অনুভূতিটা আর কি।
Mukta has come to the hospital in Savar to see one of those nurses who fell with her into the void. Her friend was brought here along with hundreds of other dead and wounded factory workers. It's the first time Mukta has been well enough to visit her workmate. Labani's arm was amputated when they cut her out of the wrecked building. The three women had landed close together. Labani remembers opening her eyes in complete darkness.
আমরা শুধু আল্লাহ করছি আর কান্নাকাটি করছি। হ্যাঁ বলছিল যে আমার হাতের কবজি চাপা পড়ছে, কিন্তু কবজিটা হলে এতটুকু কাটলেই হতো, কিন্তু উপায় ছিল না।
কাটলেও মনে করেন আমি এটা এরকম করতে পারতাম বা একটা কাজও করা যেত, কিন্তু আর এখান থেকে কেটে হয়েছে না।
Thousands of people were buried in the rubble of the 8-storey building. More than 1,000 died.
আপু আমাকে ডাকতেছিল যে লাবণী তুমি কি জীবিত আছো? তো আমি বললাম যে আপু আমি তো মোটামুটি ঠিক আছি, আপনি কেমন আছেন? তা বললো যে আমার মাথায় আঘাত খেয়েছে, বাস সেরকম কোনো সমস্যা হয়নি। তো আর যে দীপা নাম করে যে মেয়েটা ছিল ওর হাত দিয়ে দেখি কি আপু বলতেছে যে ওর তো পা দেখা যাচ্ছে, পরে আমি মাথার কাছে হাত দিয়ে দেখি যে ও মারা গেছে।
The ward is a pitiful place. The vast majority of clothing workers are women. And all of these women were in the garment factories of Rana Plaza when it collapsed. The doctors saved their lives, but no one can restore their lost limbs or dead workmates. Of the thousands injured, more than 100 had limbs amputated. Women like Paki, whose name means bird in Bengali, or 18-year-old Sonia, whose wound still throbs with pain where her leg was cut off. Others have different injuries. Shilpi's chest was crushed under concrete. Aruthi is 14. She began work in the factory when she was 12.
Rana Plaza 7 tala.
Her factory produced clothes for international retailers, including Benetton. She has no idea what will happen to her now.
গ্রামে যাই এখন কি করবো আর এনে থেকে কি করবো, পা যদি লাগাই দিতে পারে তাহলে আমি একটা কিছু করে খাওয়ার চেষ্টা করবো এনে থেকে।
In a country with no social security, these women rely on their families to take care of them. Doing the simple tasks they can no longer do. None of them knows if they will be properly compensated. So far, they've received a few $100s each in lost wages from the Bangladesh Garment Manufacturers Association. Labani's husband, Abu Musa, is only 23.
আমরা একসাথে ছিলাম তিনজন
এবং আমরা তো আসলে গরিব মানুষ তারপরে যদি আমরা মানে আমি তো পাশে সারা জীবন আছি কিন্তু আমি তো দেখা যাচ্ছে সব ধরনের কাজ সবসময় পাশে থাকতে পারবো না আমার ইনকামের জন্য বাইরেও যেতে হবে এর জন্য আমি চাচ্ছি যদি এমন কিছু আর্থিক সাপোর্ট পাই যাতে একটা কাজের লোক রেখে সে পাশাপাশি সাপোর্ট দিল আর আমি যখন বাসা আসলাম বাকিটা আমি করলাম
In the centre of Savar, next to the site of the disaster, is a small office belonging to one of Bangladesh's fledgling unions, the Garment and Industrial Workers Federation. Every day, survivors of the building collapse come here looking for help. They're still in shock.
আমি আটতলা ছাদ মাথায় এসে পড়ছে তারপর আমি বুক করা দিয়ে একটা লাশের উপর পড়ছি
সাথে সাথে মারা গেছে আরেকজনের পেটে নিচে চাপ পড়ছে উনি 15 মিনিট বাইসে ছিল উনি অনেক কান্নাকাটি করছে আমার বলছে তুমি আর কাছে আমারে নেও ধরো
As well as the survivors, there are men still searching for their wives and daughters who were working in Rana Plaza. Mohammed Alam's wife, Beauty, is missing.
ওরা আমি কইছি দেখো যদি আল্লাহ নিয়ে না যায় থাকে তাই যে কোনো মেডিকেল আছে মনে হয় কথা বলতে পারে না বা সেন্সে মনে হয় যে কোনো আঘাত লাগছে তোমরা পাইবা চিন্তা করো না
None of the survivors we met, or the bereaved relatives, questioned the neglect of the global companies that put them in this building. But as outsiders, it seems to us that that's one of the most obvious questions. But there's evidence in the rubble that those companies had priorities other than the workers. You know what strikes me about all this paperwork still here? It's all about quality for the retailers. Tests on fabric, on zips, on buttons. This is an email from Benetton talking about whether the factory had passed a test, a strength test on the fabric. But Benetton, not any of the companies that were here bothered to check that the actual building where the workers were working was safe. On April the 23rd, the day before the collapse, cracks appeared in the walls on the 3rd floor of the building. Rana Plaza was evacuated for the afternoon.
তখন দেখলাম 3টা পিলার ফাটছে 3টে পিলার ফাটছে মানে এই সাপের মতন আঁকাবাঁকা হয়ে ফাটছে 3টে পিলার একটা বেশি ফাটছে আর 2টা কম ফাটছে
The owner of Rana Plaza, Sohel Rana, went on television to insist that the building was safe.
প্লাস্টার আছে বালি সিমেন্টে প্লাস্টার করছে ওই পিলারের ওখান থেকে প্লাস্টার খুলে গেছে জাস্ট চুল পরিমাণ এতটুকু এটাকে তারা যেমন মানুষ কাল দিন বলে না
By morning, a bank and other shops on the lower floors had closed. Only the garment workers were forced back to work. Lotta was one of them.
তখন ওরা বলল যে তোমরা যদি না ওঠো তাহলে তোমাদের বেতন দেওয়া হবে না এবং কি তোমাদের চাকরি থেকে দরখাস্ত করা হবে এরকম তোমাদের যেটা করতে কোনো জায়গায় চাকরি নিতে পারবে না হ্যান অনেক কথা ওরা বলে
Just as work began, there was a power failure in Rana Plaza.
তখন জেনারেটর তো অটো জেনারেটর মানে কারেন্টটা যাওয়ার পরে জেনারেটরের আলো আসবে এ সময় আলো না এসে পিছন থেকে একটা বিল্ডিং পিলার পড়ছে আর কি দুম করে উঠছে তখন একটা আওয়াজ হয়েছে অনেক জোরে
ধাম করে মানে একটা কাঁপুনি দিয়ে ধাপ করে পড়ে গেছে পড়ে যাওয়ার পরে আমরা এখন অন্ধকার
Rafiqul Sujan heard the crash of the building from the union office.
ছুটাছুটি করে বাইর হলাম বাইর হওয়ার পর দেখি এই পাশে বিল্ডিং রানা প্লাজায় ধসে পড়ছে ধসে পড়ার পর আমি এই সাইড দিয়ে দৌড়ে আমি ওই বিল্ডিংয়ে উঠি ওই বিল্ডিং দিয়ে ওঠার পর মানুষ আর মানুষ মারা গেছেন এবং ইনজুর হয়ে আছেন
অনেক অন্ধকার পরে আমি দেখতেছি আমার এই পাটা চাপে টেবিলের চাপে পড়ে আছে, আর আমার এই কোমর আর আমি এই অর্ধেক ভীমের এই পাশে আর অর্ধেক এ পাশে, মানে ভীম আমার বুকের ওপরে এরকমভাবে একটুখানি উঁচা আর কি আছে।
Outside, the rescue was chaotic and rudimentary. Survivors were borne through the crowds on stretchers. A few lucky ones managed to climb out. Others were buried so deep under the concrete, their screams couldn't be heard.
চড়তে পারি না, মানে যেমন যে আজাব খাইছি জানেন, যে মার পেটেতে পড়ে সেরম আজাব খাইনি এখনো, যে সেরম আজাব খাইছি। অল্প একটু জায়গা ছিল, তারপরে মোবাইল ছিল, মোবাইল তারপরে ওই আলো দিয়ে তারপরে দেখছিলাম যে একটা কার্টুন দেখা যাচ্ছে, ওই যে আমার পাশেই পড়া ছিল সে কার্টুনটা, তারপরে কার্টুনটার ভিতর পানির বোতলটা ছিল, তারপরে আমি নিয়েছিলাম, নেওয়ার পরে অনেক কান্নাকাটি করছি, কান্নাকাটির পর গলাটা আমার শুকাই গেছে, তারপরে ওই পানিটা আমি নিয়েছিলাম, পানি নিয়ে খাইছি, ভাবছি কয়েকদিন থাকি না না।
Teenager Shilpi spent 5 days buried alive, surrounded by the dead.
এখনো সে ভাবতে পারি না যে আমরা বাঁচবো, মা বাবার মুখ দেখবো, তারপরে ভাই বোনের মুখ দেখবো, শুধু ভাই বোনের জন্যে গার্মেন্টসে চাকরি করতে এসেছি, ছোট ভাই বোনের জন্যে।
The friends Mukhtar and Labani were in a similar predicament.
আমি যেখানে আটকা পড়লাম ওখানে একটা মানুষের জন্য যে কবরের জন্য যে জায়গাটা হয় ওর থেকেও কম, আর একদম অন্ধকার ডার্ক, ওখানে কোনো সাউন্ড আসে না। আমি বাঁচার জন্য অনেক সাউন্ড করছি, কিন্তু সাউন্ডটা বাইরে পৌঁছায় না, কোনো আওয়াজই যায় না বাইরে।
On the second day, they heard the rescuers working outside.
আমি ওকে বললাম, লাবণী, আমরা যদি আজকে বের না হতে পারি আর বের হতে পারবো না। ওই হিন্দু মেয়ে যেটা মারা গেছে, ওর শরীরটা পচে গেছে একদম, গরম তো খুব, ওখান দিয়ে পিঁপড়া তারপরে পোকামাকড় উঠতেছিল, সেগুলো আবার আমার শরীরে ওঠা শুরু করছে, তারপরে আমি গন্ধ হয়ে গেছে ভেতরে।
Labani's husband, Abu Musa, had gone to search for Labani amongst the dead laid out at a local school.
তো সেখানে গেলাম যে অনেক লাশ, বিভিন্ন প্রকার লাশ ভেঙে চুরে আর কি ওভাবে পড়ে আছে, ওগুলো দেখতেছি, দেখতে দেখতে শুধু আল্লাহকে বলছে আল্লাহ যেন এর ভিতর না থাকে, লাশের ভিতর না থাকে।
Meanwhile, the rescuers were digging further into the rubble.
ওই লাবণীকে যখন ওরা লোকেট করতে পারলো, তখন ওখান থেকে ওরা আরেকটু ফুটা করে ওকে বের করার জন্য, এখন কিভাবে বের করবে, হাতটা বাঁচানোর অনেক চেষ্টা করছে, এখন পারেনি। তারপরে ওর হাতটা কেটে ফেলতে হলো, ওটা 3-4 ঘন্টা লেগে গেছে ওর হাতটা কাটতে, ডাক্তার দিয়ে কাটানো হয়।
It's the screams of the workers that still haunt Sujan.
সবচেয়ে মনে হয় যে চিৎকারগুলো শুনতেছি, আমি দেখতেছি, ওই চিৎকারগুলো আমি এখনো স্বপ্নে দেখি, মানে আমি মানে হয়ে মানে খুব ঘুম থেকে আমি মানে লাফ দিয়ে উঠি, লাফ দিয়ে ওঠার পরে।
As the death toll mounted, international retailers with operations in Bangladesh distanced themselves from the accident.
Benetton Group wants to clarify that none of the companies involved are suppliers to Benetton Group.
Pages of Benetton order sheets and samples were found in the rubble. The company, worth more than $1.5 billion, was forced into this admission.
A one-time order was completed and shipped out of one of the manufacturers involved.
Large Spanish retailer Mango went further. Mango, which plans to sell clothes in Australia through David Jones, is refusing to pay any compensation to the workers in the Phantom factory.
The company affected, Phantom, was not an official supplier.
Mukhtar was the safety compliance officer for Phantom.
ওখানে ম্যাঙ্গো বারের কাজ অর্ডার পেয়ে গেছিল, ওটার অডিট হওয়ার কথা ছিল হরতালে।
Phantom produced samples for Mango, and documents found at the site show 25,000 garments were due to be delivered in mid-June. Mango offered a further excuse.
It would have been impossible to detect the structural defects of the collapsed building. Mango would not have been able to ascertain the owners had built 3 more stories than is permitted.
Were you ever asked to check or look for or provide the certification for the building?
না, এটা কখনো বলা হয়নি আমাকে।
Even a cursory investigation would have revealed the building's owner had a reputation for breaking the rules. Four days after the disaster, Sohail Rana, a notoriously corrupt businessman and local politician, was arrested trying to flee the country. His Rana Plaza was built to house shops and offices, not to support the heavy equipment and thousands of workers in the garment factories. Nor was it meant to be 8 stories high.
It was extended by another 3 stories. So obviously the loads on the foundation, the loads on the columns, they have increased. I think in any other place this would not have been allowed.
Dr. Jamilur Chowdhury is Bangladesh's leading engineer.
No, that's a mystery to me also, how some of the very well-known brands decided to outsource their work to these factories located in vulnerable buildings.
The sheer scale of the disaster meant the world's attention focused on the shocking safety record of the Bangladesh garment industry. US Congressman George Miller is in Dhaka on a mission to hold industry and consumers to account.
What's your steps?
The public really has to understand, do they really want to continue to buy clothing and garments that really does have blood on its labels?
So that people aren't trapped in these buildings.
Miller has been one of the industry's most outspoken critics for years. He's meeting victims of a fire last November that killed 112 workers. On the night of the fire, the garment workers were locked into the factory.
You spoke to them about locking the doors.
So she would have also died if she had to wait another 10 minutes. So
those workers totally was in death trap. 112, some of them were suffocated and rest of them burnt to ash. 43 or 53 body even couldn't identify because they just burned to ash.
The international retailers involved at the Tazreen factory offered limited, or in some cases, no compensation.
They're spending most of their time trying to distance themselves, that they weren't there, it was unauthorized, we didn't mean to be there, we're going to stop using that retailer, that factory next month. They have a million excuses because they've been using them for several decades, so they're pretty well versed in them.
Clothing production in Bangladesh has quadrupled in the past decade. Thousands of new garment factories have been built or converted from existing buildings to meet the demand. Do you remember what the attitude was in your industry when they realised how cheap Bangladesh could be?
Let's take the next plane and place orders there.
So it was a gold rush?
Yes, and still is.
European and US retailers drove that boom. Olga Fischer has run sourcing operations in Asia for a decade for one of Europe's largest trading companies. Unlike his Australian counterparts, Fischer is frank about the industry's failings in Bangladesh. Have they given back to that country as well as reaping huge profits?
No. Clear no. Otherwise, they would pay higher prices for the products. That would be giving big something. But still, even now, after 10 years, the buyer or the companies want the same price as 10 years ago.
Australian retailers have also joined the rush to Bangladesh. Since 2008, production of clothes for the Australian market has increased by 1,500%. But locating the factories which do that work is like finding a needle in a haystack. There are approximately 5,000 garment factories in the country. We asked Australian retailers to tell us the locations of their factories. They refused.
Very nice to meet you. I'm Sarah.
To break the code of secrecy, we approached local labour activists. Out of fear of retribution, they asked us to conceal their identities.
They see us, then it's a problem for them.
Saeed, as we'll call him, works with the US-based Institute for Global Labour and Human Rights. He's arranged for us to meet in secret with workers from a factory making clothes for the Australian brand Forever New. Rubia is waiting for us. We move quickly to her house. 6 days a week, Rubia works on a sewing machine at Northern Fashions. She's paid $22 a week. 6,500 taka a month is barely enough to live on.
কিভাবে চলে রুম ভাড়া আমার 1700 টাকা নাকরি 600 টাকা লাগে 2 মনের মাসে আর একটা বস্তায় তো 2016-1700 টাকা বস্তা চালের
Hiding in her tiny room, she says the workers at the factory are abused by the supervisors to make them work faster.
হ্যাঁ বলে মাঝে মাঝে হ্যাঁ খানকির বাচ্চা কি মাদারচোদ কি মনে হয় অনেক নিজের মনে কষ্ট নিয়ে গার্মেন্টসে চাকরি করি কি বলবো দায়ে পড়ে এখন গার্মেন্টসে চাকরি করতেছি আমাদের তো চলতে হবে এভাবে চলি কষ্ট করে
Northern Fashions is a relatively modern factory, but joining a union here to improve conditions is not allowed.
এগুলা কেউ করতে চায় না স্যার সবাই ভয় পায় যে আমরা এখানে চাকরি করি এভাবে কই যাব কি করব যদি এগুলা করি আবার কিছু জোর বলে আমাদের বার করে দিতে চায় যে রাজনীতি করবে তার চাকরি থাকবে না বার করে দিবে
Rahana and her brother Bilal also work at Northern Fashion. They earn $4 a day. They say they're constantly under pressure to complete orders.
যেমন করা যেটা করতে পারবো তার চেয়ে বেশি দিয়ে ফেলায় তখন তো অবশ্যই অতিরিক্ত তাড়াতাড়ি হয়ে যায় কুইকলি হয়ে যায় তাড়াতাড়ি হয়ে যায় যেমন তাড়াতাড়ি হয়ে যায় তখনই তো কাজের বলটা পরিমাণটা বেশি হয় আর বেশি হলে বকাবকি করে
By moving to Dhaka, Rahana hoped she'd earn enough money for an education.
আমি সিলেটে পড়ালেখা করতাম ওই জায়গায় আশা ছিল যে অনেক পড়ালেখা করব কম্পিউটার চালানো শিখবো বাবা মায়ের স্বপ্ন পূরণ করবো এটাই হয় না কারণে যে বললাম দরিদ্রতার কারণে
This jumper I bought in Sydney. I think it's made in your factory. Do you recognise the label there?
আমি মনে করেন এই যে এটা জয়েন করি তারপরে সাইড মারি
এটা যেটা সব বলেন
হ্যাঁ আমাদের ফ্যাক্টরিতে সবই শুরু এটা ছাড়া আর সবই হয় নেক জয়েন হয় এটা নেক টপসিন এটা
That's the price tag of it. It cost at least $60 Australian.
Wow.
Are you shocked by how much that is?
যে এগুলোর কিছু টাকা দেওয়াটা বেশি দেওয়াটা আমাদের ক্ষতি হবে না আমাদের লাভ হবে তারপর তো ক্ষতি হবে না সেটা যদি তারা বুঝতোই তাহলে আমাদের একটা গেঞ্জির টাকা আমাকে দিয়ে সারা মাস কাজ করে নিতে পারতো না তারা এরকম কাজ করতে পারতো না
Nobody can deny it. You got a good thing going on.
Australian label Forever New, supported here by Delta Goodrum, is valued at $200 million.
So you're gonna give me what I want.
They have 250 stores in 11 countries.
I was yours forever.
We wanted to ask the founders of Forever New, Dipendra and Amanda Goenka, about the workers who make their clothes. They refused to be interviewed. Instead, we took our questions directly to the factory.
Just looking for the managing director.
I'm director. Yeah.
Ah, you're the director.
Yeah.
Hi,
Hi.
I'm Sarah Ferguson.
Yeah.
I'm a reporter from Australia.
Please come in.
The management told us the pay at Northern Fashions is correct according to Bangladesh law.
The government is taking care of it. So when the government declares this new pay scale, we'll follow it.
And are you happy with that pay scale?
Yes, why not?
But I wanted to know, the director also said the managers on the factory floor are not abusive.
Sorry, I cannot accept this claim from the workers.
Are you suggesting that they made it up?
Yes, they made it up, or they could not maybe understand your questions, something like that.
I'm very confident that they understood the question because they told me the language that was used, very strong, abusive language used to them.
Okay, we are sure that it didn't happen. Even though we'll check, Even though we'll check, we'll tell our admin department to further. They should take more care so that this kind of thing should not come.
There are 3.5 million garment workers in Bangladesh, the majority of them young women. Providing jobs in factories for them was progress, raising women out of rural poverty. But it also provided the garment industry with a workforce ripe for exploitation.
That whole responsibility of the home means that the pressure on women to just stick it out and keep working, no matter what, means that they're much less likely to organize, much less likely to complain, much less likely to demand a higher wage.
Nazmin and Rahana met us a safe distance from their homes. They say they're paid $3 a day as sewing machine operators in a large factory on the edge of Dhaka. They also report intolerable pressure to finish orders.
6 দিন কাজ করি আর 7টা থেকে মনে করেন গালাগালি শুরু হয় রাগে এসে তখন বকে চট দেয় তখন অনেকে কান্দে আর কাজ করে গালি দেয় মাথায় দেয় পিঠে দেয়.
So do you recognise these labels? Have you worked on these at your... Nazmin says she makes clothes for the Australian brand Rivers.
And that one?
At $3 a day, her wage is so small she can only afford to go home to her village to see her son once a year.
সমান হয় তারপরে মনে করেন কত মাসে আমার মনে করেন যে বাহির থেকে কারো কাছ থেকে ধার করা লাগে কারণ ছোট একটা ভাই লেখাপড়া করা লাগে একটা ছেলে আছে কারো কিছু দেওয়া লাগে এসে দিতে গেলে আমার কষ্ট হয়ে যায় ভাই.
Their factory is called Eve Dress Shirts. According to the women, when foreign buyers visit the factory, the workers are forbidden to speak to them.
মাইকিং পেরা বলে দেয় যে তোমারে তাকানি কোনো প্রয়োজন নাই যার যার কাজে এই থাকবা ব্যস্ততা থাকবা দেখার কোনো প্রশ্ন ওঠে না ওদের তোমরা দেখবা না কথা বলবা না.
We spoke to a manager at Eve Dress Shirts who denied making clothes for Rivers.
14.5 ounces of the best grade denim we could buy.
Rivers is a privately owned company with 150 stores and an online business in Australia.
$15, 4 days only.
They take lack of transparency to a new low. Rivers refuse to comment on their relationship with Eve Dress Shirts. Their only communication after weeks of trying was a single email.
Senior management will be in contact if they are interested.
Exports of clothing from Bangladesh are set to triple by 2020. Driven by its low costs, Bangladesh may overtake China as the largest producer of garments in the world.
It's the main reason why retailers went to Bangladesh, and it's the main reason why they, in my opinion, don't care with whom they work and how the company is. It's price and profit.
In 2012, the US-based Institute for Global Labour and Human Rights discovered widespread abuse of workers at garment factories in northern Bangladesh.
We found out that the Rosita Megatex was owned by South Ocean, which is the largest Chinese manufacturer of sweaters in the world. And They were cheating the workers in every single way imaginable.
One of the 8 retailers using the factories was the Wesfarmers-owned Coles. In 2011, Coles started a low-cost fashion brand called Mix.
It doesn't speak well of Coles, that's for sure. I mean, this is just one of those labels which doesn't care, and they will always turn their back on the workers. They'll always come forward with these phony codes of conduct that are never implemented.
The management of the Rosita factory told auditors that the workers were paid between $1.90 and $2.40 a day. According to Coles, they relied on that audit in selecting Rosita as a supplier.
When the workers asked for their minimal rights, the company turned on them, beat them, fired 300 workers, told the union leaders, Belal and Halal, that they would kill them if they didn't shut their mouths.
Once the information about Rosita became public, Coles stopped using them as a supplier. But Coles had deals with other factories in Bangladesh. In Chittagong, 200 kilometres from Dhaka, local labour activists tracked down the Coles label Mix. Workers smuggled the labels out of the factory. Selma says she sewed garments for Coles at Gous Fashions in 2012. At the factory, overtime demands were excessive.
তখন তো বিশেষ করে 9টা 10টার পর তো কাজ করতে নিজের খুব খারাপ লাগে তখন হচ্ছে রেস্টের সময় তো ওই সময়টায় যে কাজ করতে অনেক সময় অনেক খারাপও লাগে এবং প্রোডাকশনও কম দেওয়া হয় প্রোডাকশন দিতে মানে শরীরে কুলায় না
The workers were brought to meet us away from their home. Shahana still works at the factory.
প্রথমে ডেকে বলে দেয় অতদেরকে শিপমেন্ট তারপরে বডিগুলো এতদিন আগে বের করে দিতে হবে
দেখা যায় মাসে একটা করাই অথবা দুটো হয় এরকম রাত 3:30 পর্যন্ত ডিউটি করার আর বিশেষ ক্ষেত্রে 5 কাটায় আটকায় রাখি দেয় বেরোতে দেয় না মেয়েদেরকে
Coles confirmed Gous Fashions was a supplier from May 2011 until recently.
I'm a reporter from the Australian Broadcasting Corporation.
Managing Director Mr. Azim told us the factory had changed hands 4 months ago. He said the practices described by the female workers had ceased. Mr. Azim also said he would take no more orders from Coles because their prices were too low to enable him to run a safe factory.
I need to mention that we are not getting Coles orders directly. We are getting the orders through buying houses. So I don't know what are they making, but what they left for the factory, it is impossible to be a compliant factory with the Coles offered prices.
So they are squeezing you hard?
Yes.
The only factories, he said, that could afford to run at Coles prices were the sort of factories found in Rana Plaza.
If they want to do the business, they will have to go to the non-compliant factories. Like, you know, you have seen shower tragedy. So many people died.
3 years ago, Kmart, also owned by Wesfarmers, came down this road in Dhaka to assess a factory here as a potential supplier. The rundown building has floors added at different times. Along with the Kmart supplier Ratul Fabrics, a low-cost subcontractor occupies the second floor. So, if you came down that same road and looked at that, what would be your response?
To pass by as soon as possible, not to work with this company.
But
Jesus.
Holger Fischer has assessed factories all over Asia, including in Bangladesh, for one of Europe's biggest trading companies.
This one, I have to see, I even have not seen in our supplier portfolio at all in Bangladesh.
Never.
Never.
Never anything as bad as that.
No, never. Even the worst which we had is by far better than this one.
Really? But this is a factory used by a very prestigious Australian company.
It's hard to believe.
We asked the management of Ratul Fabrics if we could visit the factory.
After reporting 2 times,
They said no, referring us instead to Kmart Public Relations in Sydney. Kmart made sure that we didn't get access to this factory. There is no transparency here. Neither Kmart nor any of the Australian retailers want us or anybody else to know where they do business and who they do business with. Fire represents the biggest threat to garment factories in Bangladesh. At Ratul Fabrics, the windows are barred.
No go. Like in a jail, a prison, the bars. This is the most horrible thing you can do.
There have been 43 factory fires here in the last 18 months. In May this year, 8 people burned to death in a sweater factory because they couldn't get out in time.
You've seen burned bodies, dead bodies hanging in these bars because they tried to get out of the window and couldn't because of the bars. This should be the first thing, all bars, take them off.
When Kmart went into business with Ratul Fabrics in March 2010, a recent audit of the company found it did not provide sufficient wage to meet basic needs. There were also problems with the regulation of child labour. So between this audit, which was done in 2010, and the building, what would you say to using this factory?
No go. If you really speak about social compliance as a buyer, as a retailer, you should really say no.
Stay away from this one.
Yes.
Kmart has overseen improvements in the factory's conditions, and the workers are paid more, on average $16 a week. But after 3 years at Ratul, Kmart has also decided the factory's location in the mixed-use building is too risky. The order currently in production will be the last. We found Australian companies working in poor quality shared buildings like Ratul all over the city. The Big Boss factory produces clothes for Cotton On, Big W and Rivers. Big W told Four Corners they're pulling out of Big Boss once the current order is complete. While Australian retailers refused to be interviewed, local factory owners were much more open. Centex Fashions is part of a group of factories producing samples for Target. Director Mr. Zahid says Western retailers are squeezing them much too hard.
They're just asking for lower price, lower price, lower price. So,
can you actually create a top-class compliant factory with the prices so low?
No, definitely not. Definitely not, because a compliant factory requires much more expense to run the factory.
He says only a few buyers take safety compliance seriously. Do the retailers actually come to visit the factory? Do they see it with their own eyes?
Very rare, very rare. They're just improving the factory, just putting you bigger orders, bigger quantities.
So it's a bit risky for you and the people that work here?
Yes, a little bit.
Did retailers give enough back to Bangladesh in terms of developing the industry?
This is just my personal opinion. I still say no, they did not. Otherwise, we would not have companies like in the Rana Plaza, what happened there. Yeah. I always repeat, I come to the same point again. If proper prices are paid, this money can be invested in proper constructions, proper buildings, proper wages, and proper working environment.
Until now, Australian companies, including some of our best-known brands, have avoided scrutiny of their business here. They've taken advantage of Bangladesh's remoteness and lack of transparency to market cheap clothes with apparently little thought to the consequences. If Rana Plaza teaches us anything, it's that greed, neglect and exploitation can have terrible consequences. Muhammad Alam has to tell his children soon their mother Beauty isn't coming home.
এখন তো বাচ্চা কথা না কিছু বলতেই পারি না ছোট একটা বাচ্চা আছে এই বাচ্চাটা আমাদের ছেড়ে থাকে খালি কিছু বলে না
Lotta's spine is cracked. She finds it painful to move. Her husband is sick and the family relied on her income from the factory in Rana Plaza. Now it's gone and she's received no compensation.
ভাইরা যদি মনে করতো যে আমাদের জন্য হয়তো শ্রমিকরা জান দিছে তো আমরা শ্রমিকদের কিছু হেল্প করি আমাদের সে পর্যন্ত দেয়নি কোনো সান্ত্বনাও দেয়নি
Lebanese consolation is her friend Mukhtar, whose presence in the collapsed building kept her alive.
আসলে আমরা দুইজনেই কিন্তু আসলে একটা নতুন জীবন পাইছি আর যতদিন বেঁচে থাকবো ততদিন এরকম মানে আমাদের ভিতরে এরকম সম্পর্ক ভালোভাবে থেকে যাবে মানে যদিও দুই প্রান্তে থাকি তারপরেও যোগাযোগ থাকবে বা দেখা হবে এরকম
$50 brands worldwide, including Kmart, Target, Cotton On, and on Friday afternoon, Forever New, have signed up to the Bangladesh Fire and Safety Accord, an international effort to change conditions in the factories. It's time that all companies operating in Bangladesh were forced to apply the same standards there that are expected of them at home.